Thanks for joining us for this episode of Got Your Sixth Lads Advice Encounters with me, Gav Topley and Friends. This episode is a special in which we introduce an inspirational woman of the month. As Lads Advice is an all-male group, this provides an opportunity to celebrate the outstanding achievements made by women in our society and to add a different perspective on topics being discussed in the group. This month I'm delighted to welcome Madeline Black. Madeline is an author, a TED speaker, a counsellor, a women's advocate and a survivor, so please be aware this episode does contain discussions around rape, physical and sexual abuse, which some might find disturbing. Since recording the episode, I've also become aware of a raft of allegations against professional footballers and also the horrific images and audio recordings shared on social media in relation to the allegations made against Mason Greenwood. Whilst we acknowledge the importance of everyone's right to a fair trial and the assumption of innocence until guilt is proven, the injuries shown in those photographs and the behaviour demonstrated in the accompanying audio cannot and should not be accepted. As a group, it's fair to say we have a good number of football fans among us, and the recent news around these types of allegations against men in the game, men in a position of responsibility and who should be acting as role models, is disappointing in the extreme. As a group, we stand against all forms of violence and abuse, and we stand with the victims and survivors of these types of crime. These are stories that underscore the importance of the work being done by Madeline and by people like her. In speaking publicly about their experiences, the incredible bravery of these advocates helps to raise awareness of the change that's needed. With their words, they empower others with the courage to come forward, and they help to reverse inappropriate transfers of guilt from abuser to victim. They destigmatise speaking out and provide hope for survivors of abuse who are struggling that it is possible to take the power back and have a happy and fulfilling life beyond that trauma. Thank you so much for joining us, Madeline, and welcome to the podcast. I wonder if you could just start by talking a little bit about your background and your history and how we came to be speaking in the first place.
Question really. I never intended to be a speaker or an author. I never intended to speak publicly ever about what had happened to me, but I changed my mind, obviously, about 7 years ago and worked for many, many years as a psychotherapist. But the more speaking events came to me, I thought I can't do both properly, so I just focus on one. So I did used to, before pandemic, fly around the world, literally speaking at amazing conferences, beautiful countries, sharing my own lived experience of sexual violence, because I just passionate about storytelling. I believe it can be so healing, not just for me, but for the people that listen, the people listening. And I just believe in the power of storytelling so much. So that's what I've kind of been doing for the last 7 years. I've become a sexual violence activist and just speak out to end the shame, the stigma and the silence, and really to help other people find their courage and to find their voice as well.
I mean, that's absolutely brilliant. And we were speaking for a little bit of time before we started to record the podcast about Lads Advice and the purpose of what we're doing there, and really some of the input that you are going to be able to have, I hope, through this conversation that will be really helpful to individuals that I can think of on the group. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about what happened to you and some of the episodes that you wrote about in your book.
Yeah, I really just did what most teenagers did. I was 13 at the time, and I lied to my parents. My friend's mum was away, and we bought a bottle of vodka, which I can never even smell, let alone drink again. I can't go near it at all. And we took it to a little cafe in North London where I lived at the time. We drank it in secret. Obviously, had never drunk before. Was 13, skinny girl. It didn't take long, and I was just very, very drunk. And two of the young men on the table put us into a black taxi and took us back to her mum's empty flat. And it just became, I guess, very clear quite quickly on that they weren't there to help me. And they both proceeded to rape and torture me over a period of about 4 or 5 hours. And as you say, there were other episodes. So it was only really when I wrote my memoir, Unbroken, I didn't even realize I'd been raped 3 more times. I just thought, one of the many side effects, I became very promiscuous and I thought I just had a lot of bad sex. But when I was writing my book, I realized, they were asking for something. I said no, and they said yes and just carried it on anyway. So it was 3 more times before the age of 18 until I met my now husband of nearly 38 years, quite a few years ago.
And so I was listening to your book over the weekend, as you know, Unbroken, and there is some quite in-depth detail about what went on there, and it's quite difficult to listen, and at times, I had to take a break and come back to it, to be honest, because it was quite traumatic to listen to, let alone to experience. I know that you said there were possibly opportunities on that journey, particularly in the taxi, that adults could have intervened and they didn't. Um, uh, Perhaps they didn't recognize the signs or have sort of the moral courage or to step in. Is there anything you would say about that in terms of uh, children who might be at risk and adults that might find themselves in those situations?
Always step in. Always step in. He wasn't a bystander. He just chose to be a bystander rather than help me. He could clearly see that I was already being assaulted in the back of his taxi. He just really was concerned about me chucking up on the back of his taxi, I guess, and getting me there as quickly as possible. And once I was out, he was like, that was it. And I think he must have a daughter or a sister or a neighbor or a mum or a friend that's female. Where you could see I was in such a vulnerable position. But no, he didn't. So we need more upstanders rather than bystanders. People to step in. And if you're wrong, so you've made a mistake. But wouldn't you rather be wrong than and make a mistake and then not help someone that's vulnerable and in need?
Absolutely, and especially here, you were very young at the time when this happened, and so clearly, from the description of the book, it was clear what was going on really. But in this case, that person didn't have the moral courage to step in. And of course, fast forward now, and you have daughters of your own. What has been the impact of your experiences on your parenting?
Well, you can say I'm so lucky I've got three girls, and I used to think, why would you give me three girls? Why, after all my history, three girls to worry about, and being a Jewish mama as well, that comes quite natural to me to worry. It had an interesting effect because I very nearly didn't have children, and I kind of came up with a part in my life where I call my best revenge that I was determined to have my children. Didn't know they were going to be girls at the time. And I just thought I'm going to live my best life. So motherhood really healed me, but then it also opened up my trauma as well. Because when I was 13, the very same age that I was, or my daughter was 13, so not when I was 13, and all of my memories got triggered and they all came flooding in. And it gave me the opportunity to decide, I thought I was really healed and I was over it and I was okay. But looking back, I know I really wasn't okay. I was wearing this veneer, this mask, pretending to be the best mum, the best homemaker, the best wife. And I just thought, I need to really clean up this mess. Otherwise, it's going to impact my life and hang over me forever. So I guess through my girls as well, I didn't want them to have the fears that I had. I thought it took me so long to make up my mind to have them. I was terrified of giving birth. I thought in some way it would be like being raped again. So obviously I got past that because I had three of them. But I just thought if I'm not careful, I could infect them all with my fears. I could transfer them all over to them. And then I thought, well, what would be the point then of bringing them into this world if I just create anxiety through their veins? So I was very careful not to infect them with fear. So that meant I had to live a fearless life, but also I had to let them learn to be independent, strong, spontaneous, experiment, go clubbing at 14, 15, fake ID, prees in my house. Always had a very open relationship and told them, whatever you're doing, if you're drunk, you're stoned, Dad and I will just come and get you. We won't judge you. It's, normal. So I've always just been very open. I've always wanted to know where they are. Um, I'm not happy with children lying to me. So I've said that's the worst thing you could do because I had lied to my parents, they didn't know where I was. And I think maybe if they had known, that something could have changed. I don't know. So they know that lying is one of the things they can't do with me. That's the only rule that I really have. Just be honest and I won't judge you.
For sure, and I think that touched on something really important in terms of the open dialogue and children being able to speak to their parents. In your book, you describe your daughter not accepting of your lift every day to school, and so there was a period of time where you'd follow in the bus behind, following the car behind the bus, and unbeknown to your daughter, make sure that she got to school okay. Uh, what is the right balance? I guess this is a difficult
That
question in
wasn't.
parenting.
For me, that wasn't, because then I just suddenly woke up and thought, what the flip are you doing? You are letting your daughter going on the bus, but if she sees you driving behind her, what kind of message? It was all that, what am I doing to my kids? And maybe because I had to work it through other people as well, that really woke me up to like, she's actually fine on the bus. She's with her friends as a bus driver, you know. I survived the very worst thing that most women would ever want to happen, and I'm really okay now. Yes, it took a lot of therapy and a lot of working, but I have to let them live their life. If I wrap them up in cotton wool forever, they'll never be streetwise, you know. But yeah, it is about finding a balance. But I guess it's going to be different for every parent, isn't it? Depending on their own experiences or how we perceive the world. But yeah, I just didn't want to corrupt their minds to make them scared. So yeah, they're always kind of streetwise. You know, they know not to take a taxi by themselves, not to be the last one out. If you are, just stay with your friend's house. All those kind of things. Don't leave your drink in a bar. If you go to the loo, just better off to buy another drink in case it's been spiked. It's a whole different level of spiking now. My youngest one is in Leeds, and now they're needling people in clubs. So I don't know how to tell her not to go clubbing because she's not going to want to not go clubbing. So yeah, it's hard. It's not easy being a parent.
It's difficult, isn't it? And that balance of responsibility, because clearly, um, you want to stay safe, but also, in many ways, you should be able to have the right to go out and be safe. So it's sort of balancing the ideological position with the reality of making sure that
Absolutely,
going out.
violence against women is not about. It's not a safety issue. It's no amount of um, spiking tests or magic nail varnish or street lighting make a difference. The only difference will make is when specific gender-based violence is when men stop being violent towards women. It's not a safety issue at all. It's how we view women in society. It's the lack of respect. It's violence. It's a crime. Because we know women in their homes are assaulted, raped, abused. We know babies are abused, men are abused, women in burqas. It's not about our clothing. It's not about what we drink. It's not a safety issue at all. So yeah, do what you want. Sadly, it will happen. It's going to happen anywhere.
And so I guess that leads sort of into a conversation also we had before we started to record the podcast, and I recounted a story of a young man here at Cambridge who I'd met, who had been walking through the park, and a young lady coming the other direction had been sort of startled by him, and clearly scared by his physical presence in that space, to the point where he'd thought, well, what can I do? What about if I were to become non-binary, change the way that I dress, so on and so forth? And we had a bit of a conversation about that before this, but that is a recurring thing that I see also on university, the university confession site, is basically where students can ask questions anonymously, is what can men do to make life safer for women, and also for women to feel safer in the sort of current environment that you've just described.
I think step up. If you see a woman being harassed, step up. Go in and say it's not acceptable. If you're on a WhatsApp group chat and you're sharing videos of women being exploited or rape jokes, you're part of the problem. If you laugh along with it, and back to the story of that young man, it's also his perception that she was scared of him. We don't actually know if that's really what was going on, because he can't jump into her thoughts. He doesn't know what was going on. But I don't. I mean, it's beautiful that he wants to make women feel safe. That is a fantastic gesture. But a lot of it is about the other person's journey as well. I might never ever have felt safe until I really tested my fears, and that had nothing to do with men. That was about me always being afraid. Everything scared me. I couldn't even put my dustbins at the end of my garden in the dark if my husband was away, because I was terrified of my own garden, of the dark. So yeah, but I think we need men to be our allies. We need men to step up and help us, because violence against women is violence against humanity. It's violence against everyone.
Absolutely that. And I know you speak in your book about the fact that we sort of all come into the world as blank canvases, and then there are these people that commit these horrific acts, and how do they get from that being born as sort of an innocent baby into a situation where they behave like that? I mean, what's the starting point? Is it a cycle, do you think, or what can we do as parents? And I'm not a parent, but for parents who are listening, to break that cycle, or prevent these sorts of behaviors from happening?
That's a big question. I used to just think it's about education, but it's not about education. It's how we perceive women. It's music. You listen to some rap music. It's about you know, raping women, how we sexualize our children, how we advertise products, the films, the messages we give out. We vote in presidents that say it's okay to grab you by the pussy. I mean, what kind of messages is that given out? There was just something on Twitter today by the crime writer Val McDermott. I can't remember the football team that she supports, but she says she is now giving back her season ticket and she's not going to sponsor them anymore because they have now chosen a footballer that has been accused of rape to come back and train with them. And she was disgusted. I don't know if he's a convicted rapist or not. I only just saw it very briefly. What kind of message is that to women that it's okay, you can rape someone, be charged, and you can come back and work as a footballer that's given out messages to young, impressionable people? And what does it say about the women, fans that will go to this football club as well? So yeah, it's how we parent, it's the messages we give out in society, it's all of that. It's rape culture, it's victim blaming. Yes, it's a big question. I don't have the answers, to be completely honest.
For sure. And I guess that's quite a difficult area as well in terms of allegations of rape and how we respond to that. And I know that in some of the material that you sent me before, you've been asked this question before around, where that allegation has been made, what should be done, obviously, before the point of trial and someone being found guilty. We know that rapes are underreported and under-convicted. But also, I guess there's going to be a minority of cases where there are allegations that are made that are either misplaced or unfounded. How do we navigate that?
Well, like most crimes, I think 2% will be false allegations. So the 98% will be 98% allegations will be correct. Believe me, there is no way I would make up whatever happened to me. If I could choose anything, I would not choose this to be my experience in life. So I will always believe survivors. I will always believe victims, always.
Absolutely. And you speak about forgiveness, and that's another thing that, a conversation with a friend when we were discussing your book and the concept of forgiveness. And you said, that's something that you've had to do that's helped you to move forward, and it's a narrative. But to be clear that it's, you're not placing the responsibility on the victim that they have to forgive anyone. It's more about.
Absolutely. I'm not a forgiveness preacher. And believe me, it really took me by surprise when it landed into my head that I could, the idea of forgiveness, because I was filled with hate and anger and revenge and plotted these evil fantasies against them so they would get it. But I saw by me holding on to that resentment, it was damaging me. To be filled with hate and to walk with that the whole time, how I put my feet on this earth by walking with anger and hate. Everybody was a potential threat to me, and I was so angry and sarcastic. I'm very different. So yeah, I don't tell people you have to forgive. No way. There's many, many, many paths to healing, but this is just how I really chose to do it. And I guess the person I had to give first was really myself, because for years I thought, because of victim blaming in the late 1970s, it was still around. I just thought, well, it was my fault. I'd brought it on myself. I couldn't really speak about it because I was guilty and ashamed. But I realized now that I was just a very naive 13-year-old girl that went out, got drunk, and just had a disastrous ending. So many people go out and get drunk when they're young, underage, and luckily they scrape through and nothing bad happens. They might have a hangover and throw up. But I just had a really bad night, and that was never my fault. But forgiveness for me, as we spoke about that blank sheet of a baby, it allowed me to understand and somehow have compassion for them. I don't know how that happened, but I thought, I've done a really good job of cleaning up my trauma. Took a lot of work, but I have got there. And they've got to live with what they did to someone. I think, how can that be an easy journey? Whether they're conscious of that or not, it's going to impact on their life. But I also saw that forgiveness can just cut any links to them in any way. And it was always for me. It was never about them. And it just allowed me to finally accept what had happened, knowing, I can't change it, however much I want to. I can't change my history. And I just really learned to just let it go, and forgiveness helped that process.
For sure. And I mean, that's a question that I wanted to ask in terms of, that those types of emotions that you were finding were harmful to you and to your progress, and that for you, forgiveness is a way of letting go of those types of emotions. Do you think that anger or hatred or those sorts of emotions can ever be helpful in relation to something that's happened to someone as part of that
Absolutely.
journey.
There's appropriate anger and there's inappropriate anger. It was very appropriate for me to be angry, but maybe just not for as long as I lived in it for. Yeah, we should be outraged. We should be angry that every day somewhere on our planet, a woman, a man, a child will be raped, assaulted, abused. We should, we get so desensitized because we hear it so often. We also hear how little it is reported. I think maybe 20% of all cases will be reported, and how few cases go to court, and how few cases will then end in a conviction. I think it's only something like 3 or 4% in Scotland will actually get a conviction. We should be really angry about that. It's what kind of justice system is this? It's kind of decriminalized. So I also run my own podcast show, and this week I speak to an amazing woman called Michelle Baudler, and her book is called "Is Rape a Crime?" Because really, who's on trial when we go to court? We're a witness in the rape trial, but who is on trial? So we should be angry at so many things, and it is appropriate to have that anger, absolutely. And if it fuels change and it fuels a difference, it's very appropriate.
Absolutely, and I think as you say, the whole process for victims of these types of offences can be quite difficult and can be off-putting in terms of seeking justice. What do you feel is appropriate justice in these sorts of cases? What happened with your perpetrators? Do you know was I know did that ever get taken any further, or have they sort of just
I,
gone?
I never reported it. It took me 3 years to tell my parents, and one of the very last thing that they said, and one of them took really about 3 attempts to kill my life, thankfully. The other one decided it wouldn't be a good idea, so I had to be grateful to him, which kind of screwed up my head for a long time because he'd done all these revolting things to my body, and then he stopped his mate from killing me. So that was very hard for a long time. But no, I never reported it, so I don't know what happened to them. I used to have a lot of dreams that would come true, and I dreamt that one of them had died with his own knife, and one of them was in prison. But I never know if that's true. And I went to many, many different types of therapists, alternative and mainstream. I went to see a few mediums, and one of them told me that one of them was stabbed with their own knife, and one of them is now in prison. So I don't know. I've really got no idea. And the other 3 rapes as well, because I didn't even think that they were rapes. I just, diminished them and minimized them and put them somewhere back of my head as well till they popped up for me to remember. I never reported those either. So yeah, I don't know what happened to them. And I would sometimes in the early days when I used to speak out, get messages saying, it's your responsibility to report it. They could be out there doing this to other women. It's not my fault if they go out there and rape someone else again. If you don't report your car stolen, then your neighbour's car stolen, how does that make you your fault? It's the same. It's a crime committed against me. I had nothing to do with it. But that's all part of the victim blaming as well.
Where do you think this victim blaming comes from in our culture? Why is that even a thing? Because we're sat here speaking now, and it seems very apparent that that's what that is, and that it's totally inappropriate, and yet it seems to persist.
I don't know. This is just male-dominated society, just this false belief that somehow you're to blame, and it's not just our culture; it's across the world. In some countries, India or Arab countries, if you're raped, you've brought shame on your family, and your family could cast you out. You think, how is that a thing? Where has this come from? So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, but it's really unhelpful because it just silences men and women that have been abused or raped. Why would they want to come forward if they're blamed, or why would you want to go to court if it doesn't end in justice? It's not an easy process. You are, laid bare, so vulnerable in a court process. I wouldn't blame anyone for never reporting it. And in fact, when I worked at Rape Crisis, we would say you may not get justice in this trial. You will have the opportunity to share your story, which might be very healing, but it might not end the way that you want. And just so many changes needed, so many.
And in terms of the sharing of the story, this was something that I wondered, because obviously you are now an advocate for empowering victims of these sorts of crime, and that in many cases requires you to repeat and or relive even the terrible things that happened to you. Is that always a cathartic exercise, or can sometimes it be quite difficult as well to have to do that?
You know what? I have done a shitload of therapy. And I really, really would never use the stage or speak if I wasn't in a good place. And for me now, I think I have something called post-traumatic growth. I think I've really grown through what I've gone through, and I never relive it when I share it. And it's never really about me anymore. I just always think, well, who's listening? It's not about me speaking. What difference will it make to someone else that hears that? And I think how what it would have done to me if I had been at school and I had gone into a school like I now do and heard someone speak about it with no shame and no guilt. So I really, really just share it for other people, and it doesn't impact on my life in any way. If anything, obviously, it has a positive impact because it was the shame that kept me quiet, the shame that silenced me, the shame that robbed me of my voice. So every time I speak, I'm standing in that shame, and it doesn't exist. It will exist when we're quiet, but if we're speaking out, shame doesn't have any place there. So every time you stand in your shame, you're shattering it. So yeah, just find your voice and speak out.
No, I think that's a really brilliant message, and it's quite interesting in a totally different context. This idea of post traumatic growth is something that I heard for the first time a couple of days ago, and that was on a talk by I think he was a United States Marine, and he was coming back from Afghanistan, and was given that advice of people are perhaps not going to be able to understand your experiences when you get back, and that's going to be difficult, but use this as an opportunity for growth and to you know treat people as you like to be treated, but also treat yourself as you'd like to be treated as well as part of that. And I guess this links back into the forgiveness, and it's a difficult concept, I suppose. When you talk about forgiveness, what exactly do you mean by that?
Like I said, for me, it came from that inquiry of trying to understand how two young men who were just a few years older than me, how did they know to be so violent towards another human being? How could they dehumanize and degrade me in the ways that they did? Where did it all go so wrong? And I just wanted to understand. And I didn't intend to forgive, like I said. The idea came to me that if I really wanted to make peace with everything that happened, could just take this one step further rather than just feeling compassion and sorry for them for living with what they did to me. I just thought, if I really want to let this go, I can just forgive them. And that was a decision I just made silently in my heart. I didn't need them in front of me. I didn't need to write them a letter or vice versa. I didn't need to meet with them in any way. I could just make that decision just to forgive and let go. And it's just brought in different way of life completely. It's so much more peaceful now. I'd much rather live out my life from a peaceful place rather than a place filled with anger and hate and revenge. Life is much easier on this side of forgiveness.
Sure, and in many ways, I guess that's what would you describe that in that way of sort of taking the power back?
Yeah, it feels like for me, it's like the final piece in the jigsaw of my healing journey, like, this is what I need to do, what I need to do, not what anyone else needs to do, but this is what I need to do to let go completely. And it was also about accepting because, when my memories returned when Anna was 13, I just couldn't believe it. I just thought, I must be mad. If this had really happened, I would remember it. Now, as a psychotherapist, I understand, when trauma is too huge, our mind protects us and it shuts out the things that it doesn't think we can cope with at the time. And whether I thought it or not, it came back because my mind thought that I was ready to face it. Hated my therapy sessions. I dreaded going every week, but something inside drove me and drove me and drove me because I knew I wanted to clean it up. I didn't want to live traumatized for the rest of my days. So it does come back when we are ready to face it. It's not easy, but it is very, very possible to heal. And I guess it just showed me as well that, we're all so much stronger than we think we are. I'm not superhuman. We can all do this. We can all heal from stuff that happens to us.
And that's I think, another theme that comes up where sometimes people will engage with therapy, and find that they feel that it's making things worse for them, or that they don't feel that it's helping. Is that about, that being part of the process? Is it about, engaging with the right type of therapy? If that's the case, how do you go about finding out what's going to work for you?
Yeah, when you say it makes it feel worse, sometimes the days that I hated going were the days where I felt really bad were actually the best days. So it's a very personal journey as well. But when I was really caught in denial, I saw I'm going to drive myself mad. Actually, the memories and the pictures and the body memories that were returning weren't as bad as my denying it, because I just refused to accept it. And it was so strong, that allowance and acceptance, just the stubbornness of my mind would not accept it. And so my therapist at the time, he suggested going for some, you know, therapeutic massage to try some body work, because the body stores all of our trauma, even good memories. If we smell something, we can be taken back to when we're a little child, or if we see a building, or we read something, or we watch a movie, or hear some music. So it is all very linked, our mind and our body. And I went the very first time for some therapeutic massage. They believe that the trauma is held in ourselves, and she's working on me. And I could just hear this person that was screaming and shouting and fighting and kicking with their therapist. And I just thought, for goodness sake, who's making all that noise? What a fuss. And then I realized it was coming from me. And I thought, oh, okay, this is interesting, because I thought, I really couldn't trust my mind at that point. I couldn't trust what I was being shown, but I thought, I have to trust my body. There's no way that, this Londoner, quite shy Englishwoman would actually make such a noise, would make such a fuss. I was mortified what was coming out of my body, but it actually was very confirming. It really helped me realize that this is in there. This hasn't come from nowhere. This is an actual trauma response to what had happened to me all those years ago. So it then sent me on another journey of just trying alternative therapies, body therapies, sound therapy, loads of different stuff, loads of stuff. And it really helped to shift.
So in many ways, I guess that's again sort of similar to what you describe, whilst going through this abuse, in terms of the disassociation, of mind from body, as I guess a coping strategy. Is that something that you? Is that something that?
Sorry,
Sorry,
Gav.
that's all right.
I think when we're put into cases of extreme trauma, or when we think we could be killed, our body just jumps out the way. It takes our mind out of it. And then, in some ways that helped me at that time. And I think it stopped me. But I also think when the memories came back, it felt very dreamlike, because I wasn't really in my body. And for many, many years, I spent years not feeling like I was in my body, if that makes sense. I felt like I was a house, but it had no furniture. I was just renting an empty space. And so my journey has always been, even though I didn't want them back, getting my memories back and landing back in my body. That was one of the things I knew I wasn't home. I wasn't in there. I wasn't grounded in any way. So landing back in my body through the various sports and therapies, different things that I've tried, has really kind of grounded me. It's settled me completely.
So we were just speaking about the concept of sort of disassociation, and how in the experience of the abuse that you suffered, that was something that was quite useful, and also that this is something that in medicine is used, chemically induced dissociation, things like ketamine in cases of trauma by people like the air ambulance, to allow patients to cope with that physical suffering there and then. And you were just describing that you were undertaking some physical therapy and heard voices, which you then realized were your own, where you'd sort of dissociated from what was going on in the room. And we started to talk about how that might be a short-term coping strategy, but that perhaps it doesn't work in the longer term. We had a few connection issues, so I wonder if we could go back over that a little bit.
Sure. So at the time, I realize now as a psychotherapist that when we're under extreme trauma, or close to being killed, so it's quite extreme trauma, we do jump out the way. I literally floated out of my body, and I watched the whole scene from sitting on top of the wardrobe. So I was up on the wardrobe and I was down on the floor. So it was a very surreal kind of thing. So in some ways that protected me in that moment. And I'm sure that's maybe one of the reasons why I didn't die, because I was literally out of my body. Many, many years later, when all the memories returned, it felt so dreamlike, because I was out of my body. And I've always tried to land back in. I spent years numbing out, trying not to remember, pushing it far, far down into my psyche by using drugs, alcohol, eating disorders, promiscuous, rebelling, so many different side effects. And eventually we can't run from it. It does come back. And I think I would never have been where I'm at if I didn't think, okay, I have to stop running, because this is chasing me. I have to just face it. I have to walk into the darkest chapter of my life in order to heal the darkest chapter of my life. The way in was always going to be the way out for me.
No, and that makes a lot of sense. And in terms of the psychotherapy, my understanding was at the time that you were sort of going through that training, you were still in a process of healing yourself.
I didn't tell
Ha-
myself that. I thought I was healed. I thought I was in such a great place, but it's amazing how we can convince our mind of anything.
Absolutely. I mean, is that a difficulty? Do you need to be completely there to engage in those types of training, or did the psychotherapy impact your views on what happened to you?
Yeah, no, it's all part of the training. And the course I did was very experiential and experimental. So, we used to do these things which you still fill me with dread. It was like a goldfish bowl, and there'd be two chairs in the middle, and all the students around watching. And one would be a client, and one would be the therapist, and you'd kind of role play. But they'd like you to bring something that was genuine, so it didn't feel fake. And it was just as scary to be the therapist as it was just as scary to be the client. Both worked you, and for a lot of people as well, like me, they wore a mask. They thought they were okay. We could convince ourselves of anything. Didn't take long for the real issues that I hadn't yet dealt with to come up to the surface. So it was a brilliant time, because if I can't do that journey myself, how could I possibly do that if I've got a client sitting opposite me that tells me they were gang raped when they were 13? What would it do for them? What kind of therapist would I be? So that really helped me to not just work it for myself, but to work it in my then chosen career.
And you speak in your book about your partner Stephen and how supportive he's been and how important that's been to you on your journey. If we have someone listening who's got a partner who's perhaps been a victim of sexual abuse or rape, what advice could you give to them about how best to support their partner and to do for them what Stephen's done for you?
Yeah, I think just whoever your partner is, what I've noticed from Stephen is that he has quite a lot of patience. He would have to have patience with me, no judgment, even all the what he might consider wacky therapies I was doing. He would just support me. If it helps you, then that's fine. You go off and do that. Never judging me. Many times, when it was all coming back in the most intimate of moments, his face could turn into their faces, and I would have to push them off me. And he was fine. He was always understanding, and very near to the end of when I was going for therapy as well, I just started to cry and cry after we'd had sex. And I just thought, why now? Why is this coming in? And he would just say, are you okay? And he would just hold me tight, feel the tears, from my eyes going onto his cheeks, and just not say anything, just be a very steady, solid presence, and just went at my pace. And I think that's all you can do for someone. And that to me, we've been together a long time now. It's nearly 40 years. That's just unconditional love, really, isn't it?
I think it is, and I guess in many ways that also takes uh, a type of um, confidence in him that what's going on is to do with these experiences, and what has been inflicted upon you in the past, and not something that he's doing. Was there sort of some mutual reassurance that had to happen there, or how was that? How did you navigate that?
Yeah, but it's interesting how it came up for me. I never ever had any worries or concern about Stephen. It was when I had my first daughter and Anna was a baby, and he went to change her nappy, and I was like, oh, would her, all her private parts are exposed, and what if he does something? I said, oh my God, where has this thought come from? There was never anything in him to suggest he could abuse my daughters, but that was my own fear. So I had to learn to recognize him. He's really, really decent guy. I used to think, thank life, whoever that brought him to me, because I do really think he was an angel sent to save me. I don't know what would have happened to me if I hadn't met him. I'm very, very grateful, very lucky. But yeah, everyone's journey is going to be different. But I think if we can just stay at the person's pace, don't judge them, don't push them, don't ask them questions, just be kind to them and support them. And, you know, I would go to college. It was like one weekend every month, and he could see when I walked in that from my face if it'd been a heavy weekend or an okay weekend, and he'd just run me a bath, make me a cup of tea, have dinner was on the table. Just be kind, really. That's all it's about.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about not asking questions, but I suppose is at the same time showing you that he was receptive to listening if you wanted to talk.
Yeah. Saying if you want to talk about it, I'm here. But saying, what did you do this and how did that happen? Then that starts to get a bit kind of blaming, I suppose, if we were to interrogate someone, maybe. But yeah, I think just really judge the person, go at their space. And so eventually, after about 3 years of therapy, my therapist said, maybe you should tell him more of the details, because he knew that I was raped. He didn't know details. And he said, he might be wondering why you're still coming for therapy 3 years later. I had still so ashamed, and I had this fear if he knew what happened to me, he wouldn't want to be with me. It would put him off me sexually. He wouldn't fancy me anymore. All of these paranoid thoughts came up. And the only way I could tell him was when we were in bed with the lights off and holding his hand. I couldn't even look at him face to face in the daylight and tell him all the details. And I got quite emotional, and I said to him, kill me. He said, but they didn't. I thought, he would make a great therapist, actually. They didn't kill me. I am here, and I am married, and I have got 3 kids, and I love my life. I'm going to live my life. So even though I couldn't do that face to face, it did shift something between us.
That's amazing. You said you used some terminology there, but he didn't question the wacky therapy. In terms of exploring all of these types of therapy and perhaps also some form of spirituality as well. Could you talk us through some of that? What was your experience of that? Was it helpful? Were there aspects of that in the spirituality that is genuine belief, or is it more about a narrative that works for you, or how did all of that sort of unravel for you?
Yeah, so when I was studying psychotherapy, it was really through college that I heard about this man called Imaho. My tutor at the time, he's a shaman, and he'd been going to his workshops for many, many years. And really, he is the one who encouraged me to write my story down. And that took about 4 years, and I produced 12 pages in those 4 years. And he encouraged me to speak. He used my story in one of his workshops. And he had obviously had huge influence on my life, but also through college, they introduced us to sweat lodges, and I was terrified of the dark. I was so scared of it. It was pitch black. And again, I heard other people talk about San Pedro, which is like plant medicine. I think most people will have heard of ayahuasca, but I knew ayahuasca rendered you senseless, that you couldn't move. And I thought, oh, somebody could take advantage of me, because I was still so paranoid of being out of control and men that ran the workshops. So I decided to go for San Pedro, which is kind of a bit mellower, even though it's not mellow in any way. That's maybe the wrong word. It's a bit softer than ayahuasca. And what it does really is I guess it strips you of all your conditioning, and it just leaves you with what is. So if there's any trauma or anything, good stuff, bad stuff, it just rises to the surface, and you see it for what it is. You don't see it through all the veils of denying, or all the veils of all the stuff we put in there, our perceptions, our thoughts. You just see it, and it was horrific. I don't know why I put myself through it, because it's not for the faint-hearted, but it was the best thing I ever did, because it just showed me that these are pictures, and I am really visiting like a multi-screen cinema complex, and I'm the one that's playing that film over and over and over again in my head to the very final time I took it. And I used to fight with all the images that came up when I was taking it. But the final time I just thought, right, sod it. I'm going to sit by the river. It was alongside a river in the countryside of Scotland. Show me everything that happened to me. Show me the whole film, and I will watch it. So in my mind, I'm, going back, regressing over what happened. And I thought, that's it. They are just pictures. They are just memories. It's not happening right now, here, anymore in this moment. And in this moment, I'm okay. I'm not what they did to me. I'm not my body. I'm not the things that happened to me. And it just really helped me, I guess, to wake up that it's done, it's finished, it's over. But that took a lot of different therapies. It's not just the one thing that helped. It's maybe they've all built on each other. And it took really took me decades, I suppose. But it was a tough journey, but one that you will never, ever, ever regret, cleaning up the trauma. Never.
And in terms of those types of methods, you say you've tried lots of different methods, to get where you are those methods that similar ones to the ones you just described, ones that you'd recommend for everyone, or are there certain types of people that are more predisposed to finding different types of therapy more helpful, including those things that are more alternative?
I'd say, when I wrote my book, it wasn't a self-help guide. This is just really my journey. Some people might find something helpful. Some people might find nothing in it helpful. there will be a way for you. Find your way. Whether that's dancing, writing, singing, walking, climbing Munros, doing ayahuasca as well, having therapeutic massage, using sound therapy, just talking therapy, whatever it is, there'll be something that will have to shift it. But for me, because it was so held in my body, and I knew by the way I responded to certain events, it wasn't all in my mind. And my mind and my body, they were disconnected. They weren't operating as one. And I knew I just wanted to align it and put it back as one. So that's always been my journey as well, just getting my head and my body to work together.
And you speak about that in terms of acknowledging and understanding what happened. And I know from Unbroken, from your book, that your friend who was in the flat at the time denied what had happened. How do you feel about that now in response in respect of that person and what happened there?
It used to drive me crazy. I think, how could she say that? Does that mean I'd made this up? Will people not believe me? And all of those paranoid thoughts. But, I had to learn to let that go, because some things you're never going to get answers for, and I'll never get an answer. And out of all of my friends that I know from school, no one's ever found her on social media. I have no idea who she is, what name she goes by anymore. And I just think, well, maybe the same thing happened to her. Maybe nothing happened to her, or maybe she has blanked it out as well, numbed from it. And I guess we were young and stupid and naive, and maybe she just thought we'll get into trouble. We used her mum's empty flat when she was away. It's not what your mum really wanted you to do. So I don't know, to be honest. I don't really have any anger towards her. She did what she had to do, and had to let it go, because I'd drive myself crazy with an answer I might never find.
For sure, and I think that takes some strength on your part, and it's a persistent theme in speaking to various people, about dealing with trauma and dealing with sort of contemporary life, even really. I was lucky enough to speak to Stephen Fry and Darren Brown, and both of them gave very similar answers to the one that you just given around, understanding the things that you can't change, and therefore, not obsessing over them, but having the courage to change the things that you can.
And it takes a lot of obsessing about it before you realize that I shouldn't be obsessing about it. It's not an easy thing, just to go, oh, I'm just going to drop that. It's a process to drop stuff. It's not really overnight.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing you speak about in the book is that you were using things like drink and drugs and promiscuity and control over eating, which led to eating disorders as perhaps ways of having some power. Did you recognize that at the time? And I guess my question is really twofold: is that if you didn't, how can people recognize that in themselves? Or if you're supporting someone or have a friend that is in that situation, how can you help in those situations?
Yeah, very, very definitely for me. When I was controlling my eating, I became anorexic, hospitalized and force fed and all the rest of it. It was the only thing I could control. I wasn't at a place where I was speaking yet. I had kind of almost became a bit kind of mute. I kind of grunted, which I guess would be a normal teenage response anyway. But it was the only thing that I could control. I couldn't control this darkness. I was just drowning in this darkness inside. I would often just walk into my mum's room and stand there. My mum had a period of being bedridden for a while when I was younger, and I also thought I could make her sicker, or she might die from the shock. And I would do anything that I could not to tell them. I just thought, I hoped maybe looking back now, by my bad behavior, they would just guess. They could dive into my brain and take the information out. Clearly, that's not what happens. So I guess if you're worried, if your child starts to change, if they do become sullen, if they do lock themselves away, if they not caring about washing, or you notice they're not eating, or they smell of alcohol, my room must have stunk of dope. I was used to smoke at home as well. Pay attention, try to get them to communicate what's going on. Yeah, there's obviously going to be some kind of experimental stages as well. And for some people, I guess it's normal just to experiment with drink and drugs. But when it becomes a coping technique, it's not healthy. It was a very unhealthy coping technique. But I didn't know any better at the time. That was the only way I could blank it out, numb from it, and have some kind of control. But as I said, we can't ever really numb out completely. It always comes back, always.
In the end, you wrote a letter to your parents, but you described, I think it was Great Ormond Street Hospital you were in with the eating disorders, and that you felt that it was clear that you'd been through this trauma and you were having these trauma responses, but that question was never asked.
It astounds me, really. Because when I wrote my book, I asked for my notes, which was not easy to read, and they didn't really have any idea. I'd been in contact with this hospital, Great Ormond Street Hospital. It was the Mildred Creek unit, the children's psychiatric ward, a couple of years earlier because I'd had an epileptic fit because I thought my mum was going to die. So they just picked up where they left off. It was very lazy medicine. They just thought because of the stuff at home going on, that my grandparents didn't speak to my mum, and my mum was really ill, and they just thought because of that pressure, I was suicidal or I was depressed. So they just had me down as a adolescent with suicidal ideation. But looking in my notes, they had no idea I was traumatized, and I just thought, wasn't it obvious? Why do we look at people's behavior and go, oh, she shouldn't be doing this, she shouldn't be doing that? Why don't you just say, look, what's happened to you? What went wrong? We never question that. So we really need to change the questions that we ask. And I hope, things have changed. I don't know. I hope they have.
There are a couple of other people on the group that have posted things that I think you might be in a position to provide some insight with. And again, we discussed this before coming on. There's a gentleman who he's gay. He was raped by another man, and since then has found it quite difficult to leave the house. He lives with his parents. There are days of the week when they're not there, when he finds it quite difficult. And he's quite frequently, since joining the group, made attempts on his own life where he's struggling to cope with what happened to him. And I mentioned to him that we were going to be having a conversation today. And what he's come back with is what he's found difficult is even going outside and not thinking about it happening or that it could happen again. And he says he acknowledges that that's quite subjective, but he wondered whether you had any input on that,
Just hope that the young man you're talking about has good support. Thankfully, because of lockdown, so many support agencies not even meeting face to face again. There's telephone support, there's email support, there's text support, there's Zoom support, because he's very aware of these fears that he's had, and that's what happens when you've been through a trauma. They magnify. I had so many fears and phobias that stopped me living my life, and the more I focused on them, the bigger and huger they became, and it really impacted on my life. And everyone's going to be different on the therapy journey. But he's very clear of what's stopping him. He has a fear that this will happen again, this will reoccur, and that's what he would need to take to his therapist and work through with them. But I hope he has good support.
And in terms of accessing that support, what are the first steps to doing that? If these things have happened to you and you've been unable so far to access support, where do you start?
I would just say to this young man that you're speaking about, I just hope he has good support, because when we have awareness of where our struggles are, what our obstacles are, what's getting in the way of us healing, then that's a really good place to be in. It might not feel like it's a really good place for him to be in, because right now it's stopping him from living his life, from literally leaving the front door. But I had so many fears, phobias, anxieties, paranoid thoughts that it really stopped me from living as well. And I would take him to therapy, I guess because of lockdown. There's so much more available online now. So be aware of where you have these blocks, where you have these places that you can't get past, and take that to your therapist.
Absolutely. And in terms of identifying a therapist, is that something that you would do through other support organisations that you'd recommend, or through your GP? Or
Yeah, everyone's going to be different. For me, it took me quite a few times to find the right person. As a client, you can look in someone's eyes, you can begin to tell your story, and instinctively whether that's a thought process, but it's more of a felt process to work with that person or not. If they can hear what you have to say. I worked with quite a few, and I thought, actually, you just, so many that I went through to start with, and I thought, no, you're not the one. And I got to a place where I was wanting to face all of my fears. Don't ask me how I got to that place. And the two young men who raped me were sons of American diplomats. So I found a male American therapist because I thought I need to challenge all these fears because they're lying to me, my fears. So that was very confrontational for me to work with a man, but that might not be for everyone. In the beginning, I worked with women. So decide, does the gender matter? What kind of therapy? To me, it's not a particular type of therapy. It's the energy behind the person that they bring. I'm not going to say CBT is better than Gestalt or this, that, and the other, because it comes down to the person at the end of the day. Can they hear what you have to say? Can they support you? And can they facilitate your healing journey? Those are the most important parts of any journey with trauma.
And you did say that earlier on the sort of the issue of gender when we were discussing, the podcast before we went live to record it, about the realization that, this horrific abuse that you've suffered has been at the hands of men, but also that, some of the support that you've received that's been some of the best has also been at the hands of men as well.
Absolutely. I've seen the worst of men and I've seen the best of men too. And it's actually, two men tried to kill me when they raped me, and it's always been men, pretty much, that have really healed me. So it's a bit of a contrast there, really, isn't it?
I guess, yeah, in terms of the sort of the individual versus the cultures that we're grappling with as a society at the moment. There's another question from someone on the group. It's a little bit longer, but I'm going to read it if that's okay, so that I put it across in the right way. So it says this. Okay, the first thing you have to understand is that I was sexually abused when I was around 9. I lived in a bad area and I'm autistic and didn't have a clue what sex was at the time. I thought it was just something normal, that all my friends were probably doing it as well. And this went on for at least a year, for as long as I was living in that area. Now, I thought I'd made my peace with it, but recently in a conversation with a group of friends, some of whom have been in and out of therapy for years and know a thing or two about it, we discovered another way that it's affected me is it's given me an unhealthy, endless, insatiable craving for approval from women. The kind of approval that can only come from sexual relationship. Hence, I am a sex addict. I've hooked up with some questionable women in my life. One with lots of red flags that my autistic ass barely saw anyway. But if I turn them down, then part of my psyche that's a sex addict wouldn't forgive me for that. And so I'd be thinking for weeks after, why did you do that? It's like a black hole in my chest and it's sucking everything, including my light. And that's why I've been desperate to get into a relationship with literally anyone who will have me. I didn't even care if she was right for me or, anything else. If she was willing, I'd do it. Because being in a relationship will plug up that black hole. In the last couple of days, learning that this is why, unlike everyone else I know, I'm the only one that's seemingly incapable of enjoying single life, which is a battle on its own. I just recently realized all of this and I'm trying to get a therapist to speak to about it, but I'm really struggling with that realization. And after discussion with my friends the other day, I went out for a walk at 3 a.m. and cried. It felt like it was the first time I'd ever realized how severe the damage really is. And this is the young man we were speaking about again before the podcast. So he was 9, and the young lady that was in the situation was 11. Is there any input that you could give on that you think might be helpful?
Absolutely, man. It's very hard when we wake up to what we're doing and how we are damaging ourselves, but it's also very, very good because he is so aware now of the unhealthy patterns that he's got caught in. He knows he's caught. He said he's sucking the light out of him. The darkness is taking over. Some people, they get to therapy, how can I help you? I don't know. But he knows exactly which way he wants to go. He knows all these unhealthy patterns that have developed due to the trauma that he experienced. That's an amazing place to start. Go to therapy, and that's where you start. That's what you want to work. He knows exactly he doesn't want to stay like this. So when you are that targeted, you're like 75% ahead of most clients. You really know exactly, I do this, it's not helping me, how can I change? So he's in a good position to start healing, definitely.
Sure. So that self-awareness, I think, is as you say, quite important and puts him a bit of an advantage in terms of then, moving that forward.
And I think it's layers, really. We work it in layers. Like I worked it for a while. I thought, oh, I'm great now. I've had my kids. I'm fine. Boof, something else coming. Okay, I'll go back and work it again. Oh, something else comes in. And then it's just layers. It's like a big, big onion. And we just peel the layers. But I think if you think of the onion, that first layer is really tricky to get off. But once we do it, it gets easier and easier. And eventually you can get to the core of the onion. And yeah, there will be tears. Like the onion. There are often lots of tears. But that's good as well. It's all good.
Absolutely. In terms of, so, you obviously are out here now making a huge difference, and that's clearly a motivation for you and a driver to make that difference. How are you dividing your time at the moment? I know you've written books, given TED talks, you're working as a therapist, you have some involvement, I believe, with the Forgiveness Project.
Yeah, I never really plan anything anymore. I just try and live my life. So all that's happened has kind of come to me. Yes, I obviously had to fill in my form for my TEDx talk, but I did another one in lockdown and they invited me along. So doors just open now and I just say yes. I just say yes to life. For years, I just said no and hid in the shadows. So I'm I just like to see where life goes. I never thought I'd write a book. I never thought I'd be a speaker. I no longer work as a therapist because the speaking took over. Obviously, with pandemic, all the events industry suffered rather largely overnight, and everything I had planned was cancelled. So I do a lot of online talks. I'm going to Fife College on Monday, Barnsley College in a few weeks to speak at the Crime and Judgment Week and then Mental Health Awareness Week. So I do talks. I love going to schools. I love speaking to young people. Um, so yeah, whatever comes in, comes in. And I also, in lockdown, because I had hardly any work, I started my own podcast, which is Unbroken Healing Through Storytelling. And I just really speak to people that have overcome adversity and have bounced forward in life. They're kind of thrivers, because I just wanted to share a bit of positivity and a bit of hope, because it was such a gloomy time for everyone in the early days. So that keeps me busy as well.
Fantastic. So did all of this start with the Forgiveness Project? And if that is the case, could you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Sure. I shared my story publicly with them. So that was 22nd of September 2014. Marina, who is the founder of the Forgiveness Project, I think it's been years, I'm not sure. She just like to collect stories of forgiveness. They do lots of other work as well. And just through an interaction online through social media, she messaged me and asked if she could share my story publicly. And I just thought, I don't know if I could do that. That's quite a big ask. And she said, you could be anonymous. You don't need to put your picture up. You can just, don't have a name. And I just thought, I'm just so tired of being ashamed for this crime that was committed against my body that had nothing to do with me. I never invited it in. And I just thought, no, I am going to share my story with my face and my name. Yeah, I say that bravely now. I was still scared, but I just wanted to let go of being ashamed. And this was another way to step into my shame, was to face my shame. But it just opened so many doors for me, and it's just put me on this incredible journey. I could never have imagined, the things that I've done. So yeah, that was where I first shared my story.
I think that's really great. And the thing is, the theme here is around you helping others. How do you make sure that you protect your own time, take time for yourself, and look after your own well-being?
Gym fanatic. So I go to the gym 3 times a week. I still do karate. I do yoga. I walk my dog. So yeah, it's very important for me. And if I get overwhelmed in any way, I would always go back to therapy or seek some way to look after myself. I'm very aware of self-care because, if I can't look after myself, no one's going to do it for me. So it's really important to find out what helps you to switch off when things get too much. What helps you in a positive way, not in an obsessive way. So yeah, I do a lot of exercise.
And is there something around boundaries there too, in terms of when you're seen by a lot of people as someone who has taken on these traumatic experiences and come out of the other side so strong and been able to sort of advocate and speak and be a therapist, that if people are always trying to draw on that resource, are you able to be boundaried and sort of and protect your own time?
Absolutely. I will get messages obviously from survivors that maybe watched the talk or read the book or whatever, but I'm very clear I can't be their therapist. I'm not their therapist. But I will make sure they've got support and make sure they know how to get good support, give them helpline numbers, signpoint them to some organizations. Yeah, I can't support everybody, but I will always, it might take me a while, but I will always try and respond to every message I get or every email.
It's really fantastic. So the question I want to end on, in the description of your book on Amazon, it states that you are now able to live a happy and fulfilling life. What does that mean to you, and how do you go about achieving that?
Oh, well, it used to be that every single thing I did was clouded by them and what had happened to me. I had to risk assess everything. It doesn't even come into my head. I don't even think about it or see it. I really feel like life. Life is great. I'm going to live my life and enjoy it. We don't know how long we're here for in terms of, how long Earth has been existing. We're just here for like 10 nanoseconds. And what are you going to do with those nanoseconds? Am I going to be forever traumatized by event that I can no longer change, or am I going to live my life as best as I can? Just let it go and get on with it. So that's what I've chosen to do. And it is a choice. Once I worked and worked and worked it, I saw that I could stay caught in all of this trauma because it's a very familiar pattern, or I could walk through it, and choose to live a good life. And that's what I've done.
I think that's brilliant advice. Madeline, it's been really great talking to you, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. What you're doing, I think, is incredibly important. And as I say, I think your book, I chose to listen to it on Audible, and whilst difficult in places, is really inspirational and really empowering. So I would recommend, to anyone that's listening that is interested in listening to more about Madeline's story, that's a good resource. But thanks so much for joining us today, Madeline, and all the very best with all of your projects moving forward.
Thank you, and you're welcome. It's been a pleasure to speak to you too.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Got Your Six, Lads Advice Encounters with me, Gav Topley, and my guest, Madeline Black. If you've been affected by the themes discussed in today's podcast, help is available, and there are a number of resources on the following websites: www.nhs.uk/live-well/getting-help-for-domestic-violence. Alternately, www.nhs.uk/live-well/help/sexual-health/and-sexual-assault. If you live in England and Wales, you can call the Rape Crisis Helpline, and that number is 0808 802 9999. The line's open between 12 and 2:30 and 7 and 9:30 every day of the year. If you're in Scotland, you can call Rape Crisis Scotland on 08088 010 302, and you can get in touch with them any day between 6 p.m. and midnight. If you'd like to contact the show, as always, you can contact us on the group on Facebook, Lads Advice, on Instagram, lads_advice, on Twitter, advice_lads, or by emailing us, ladsadvice@hotmail.com. If you'd like to support our fundraising for Papyrus Prevention of Young Suicide, you can do so at www.justgiving.com/fundraising/Chaz and Gav/Killy. Finally, if you'd like to help with the running costs of the podcast and the group, you can do so at www.patreon.com/Gav Topley. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.